have you ever wondered what goes into designing many of the appliances you have in your home right now? Well, our guest today on Let's Shape the Future can tell you exactly that, as well as providing a whole host of insights into the world of consumer products. Pernilla Johansson is the Chief Design Officer at Electrolux Group. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's going to be interesting.
So let's start with your career journey up to the role that you're in now. Could you maybe talk us through the roles that you've had within businesses and sort of your path to becoming a chief design officer?
Yeah, maybe I take you back even further by framing, Panilla as a student. And actually, I was very average in school. I struggled, and I kind of realized quite quickly that I had to compensate through a lot of hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And I graduated with satisfying grades in the end for all the effort I put in, but not with a direct route to a university degree. And then because I took a sidetrack and explored just for a year an artistic education, because I had that side interest. I just wanted to give myself a break. And that's when I found design. And I found an alternative into university that didn't judge me on grades, but judged me on the applications that I sent in.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't easier because it took a lot of, it was 750 applicants on 50 seats, and first, numerous amount of samples, and then 4 days of working at school to prove yourself. So it was not necessarily an easier route, but I knew at that time that this is the track that I'm on. So never looked back since then. And when I started studying, I think it was typical for Sweden at that time. I had a lot of student friends that already had a lot of experience. They had been out working. I remember one of the guys that worked at Saab engineering, and another one at Saab model making, and the third one had gone through craft school and made his own boat. And I felt extremely small in comparison to their experiences. So I decided early on that I wanted to go out and learn what designing was really about before I kind of graduated. So on that path, I was I tested small consultancy, large consultancy, and then I landed at Philips Design. And that's where I understood that large multinational companies, that was my forte. That's where I wanted to stay. And I had this dream that I wanted to travel through work. A lot of my friends back in those days, they were earning money and then traveled. And I kind of looked at their experience and said, that's fantastic, but I want to combine these two worlds. So actually the real motivation behind my career is the wish for traveling. And that has taken me through 3 continents, 5 countries, and multiple design positions within 2 large companies. And back in 99, I landed in Singapore, and that's where I stayed for 16 years. And I can honestly say that that's where my career took off, because I came in as a senior designer, and then I grew with the growth of the home entertainment and the DVD category at that time.
Yep.
And headed that experience area. And eventually Electrolux came and knocked on my door and offered me an opportunity to set up a design team from scratch. And that was, to me, too good of an opportunity to say no to. So I jumped ship, and then after I'd done that for a few years, they brought me back to Sweden. Full circle, for 23 years, almost on the day that I left. And then after a few years, I was offered to take on the head of design function. And that's what I'm doing today. That was kind of a short, speedy version of it.
No, that was great. And it's funny, I've had a number of guests who have not done similar things, but in terms of gone to Asia as part of their job, and all of them have said just how amazing the continent is, and especially places like Singapore. They all say they absolutely love it.
Yeah, there was, I mean, I was between all the jobs, I was one of those, you know, probably all my managers were extremely tired of me because I was always, whenever I got a new assignment, I was like, okay, within 2 years, we need to talk again. You know, I always wanted to see what was the next progression. Not necessarily in ambition or career, but just for doing something new, learning something new. And when I came to Singapore, I mean, partly the growth was so exponential, but it was also an environment which was so wonderful that I never really saw reason to leave. You know, I really tried. Every year I was like assessing the situation, but kept on staying.
Nice. And so a lot of listeners will have Electrolux appliances somewhere in their home, but for those that aren't aware, did you want to provide some background as to who Electrolux are, what you do as a business, and what your role in the business then entails?
So Electrolux is a global appliance company. Just to give it a little bit of a feeling of age and scale. So it was founded in 1919, which is now over 100 years ago. It is present today in about 120 countries, and it's selling about 60 million appliances a year. And it's not all under the Electrolux brand. We have actually a branded portfolio, but I would say 85% of our brands, or maybe even more now, is Electrolux, AEG, and Frigidaire. Those are the core three brands that we operate under. I think what's worth mentioning as well is that Electrolux has always been extremely active on the area of sustainability and had sustainability at its forefront. And we have now a purpose and a better living program that really drives our ambitions and our behaviors and the ambitions of where we want to take ourselves for the next 100 years.
Nice. And when someone says a chief design officer, what does that mean? What does your day-to-day life look like?
That's what I would like to know. No, just joking. No, but the first time, actually going back, it's maybe interesting because the CDO title, I heard about it for the first time, maybe somewhere in the early 2000s, and it was then referenced to me. Someone told me that the CEO of Samsung had double titles. So there was CEO and CDO. And that just showed how important design was for Samsung at that time, and probably still is. And then that title started to exist in the design industry, at least in those companies which do take design very seriously and put design at a certain kind of like level in the company. Since then, I think the CDO title means many different things, and I couldn't help myself but Google it a while back, and I checked it, and it's actually, you know, Chief Data Officer, Chief Diversity Officer, Chief Delivery Officer, Chief Digital Officer, and then Chief Design Officer. So it can mean many things. I use it more externally, I have to admit, simply because I do think it is signifying the importance the design has in Electrolux. But internally, I'm more prone to talk about how I'm heading design in Electrolux. And to me, it is really, when you come to that kind of like managing design on that level of scale that you have in large multinational companies, it is really more about creating the right enabling conditions and creating a really, really strong design organization. So sometimes I feel that I'm more of an organizational designer than I am, you know, a designer of experiences, because I'm very much in the forefront of driving those enabling conditions that the designers need. Everything from the spaces they are in, physically or digitally, the tools they have, the capabilities, their growth, their career. There's so many aspects to consider, and you have to partner with a lot of other peers like HR, IT, communication, to really make sure that the entire design operation is effective and that we can deliver to our absolute best.
No, it's really interesting, as you say. It's it's also how the role is perceived externally compared to internally. It probably differs quite a lot from business to business. But no, like what we've got now is so Pernilla, you are a guest on Let's Shape the Future, but I and the audience want to know what has shaped the guest. So for this part, I'm going to ask you 3 simple questions, but
Okay.
they'll help the audience get to know you just a little bit better. There's nothing too difficult. So first question is, what are your top 3 passions outside of work?
Okay, one is easy, photography.
Nice.
My kids are driven nuts by me having to document everything. And I'm a little bit sad that I've moved from my beautiful SLR camera to, my mobile phone, which nowadays takes almost good enough of pictures. So photography is a big, big passion area. A second passion area would be travel. Which kind of combines kind of nicely. I'm really looking forward to explore the world again. After having lived in Asia for such a long time, I managed to explore that side of the world quite intensely. And coming back to Europe, I thought, oh, it's a fantastic opportunity to explore Europe again. And I got almost halfway on that. And Africa, which is a complete white field for me, is next on my my map. So yeah, and third one, just good social environments with good food and drinks. I'm happens to be married to a man that is a fantastic chef, not professionally but almost. So I'm enjoying a lot of good food, and we love having guests at home, and it doesn't have to be all fancy. It can be very casual as well. But good. Those 3 are good passions.
Nice. My dad's the same. My dad's a chef, so we used to like that. Just have some amazing food, and the best thing is you don't need to cook it, which is the best part. But then it means you have to do the washing up, which is the worst part. So.
Yeah, you have to do the washing up and the laundry. I don't mind that actually. Yeah. I kind of like that as well.
So second question, which you've probably answered it already in the first. It was going to be, what will be the first country you visit when lockdowns and COVID is no longer?
Yeah, I mean, that is actually a really difficult question, because I think I got that question a while back and I said South Africa because, that's been one of those goal countries that I've never managed to get to. But now after this period, I think I just want to go back somewhere that I've been missing. Before I didn't really try to go back to places, but now I feel that would be really, really nice. And I mean, I think a trip to around Singapore, Malaysia, and Philippines would be my wish at the moment.
Yeah. Nice. I went to Thailand just before coronavirus, and I fell in love with the place. It's so nice, and the Thai people are so good as well. And lastly, what is the best piece of advice that someone has ever given to you?
I think I have to go with one which I heard quite recently, and it sort of got stuck with me. Because when you work in design and you're design thinker, I mean, you're very prone for change. You love change, and you love speed, and change should come fast. And this person told me that it was actually kind of like a peer in the industry. And he says, yeah, whenever the team is getting very anxious, then I tell them that they should imagine themselves being tied to a rubber rope, and then they should run as fast as they can, but they should be conscious about the rubber rope being attached to the organization. And when they come to a point where they feel that the stretch is too tight, they should grab hold of a tree and then they should just hold on to ensure that they don't fall back, and let the rest kind of come along. And then it's time to continue running to the next tree. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy, because I think it's so important that when you drive change, you need to drive change in a speed that others can handle. And to find that balance and getting people along with you, I think is incredibly clever. So I laughed a lot when I heard it. I thought it was really hilarious, but it stuck with me. I thought it was really good advice.
No, that is great, and I've not heard of that before. But I like how you're constantly driving change within an organization, but also it's sort of the matter of driving change, but staying within the boundaries of the organization, but bringing the organization with you. So
Exactly.
it ticks all boxes. I was going to ask you what your favorite home appliance was, but I'm sure you won't want to upset any of the teams. Electrolux.
I can. Yeah, because actually that's an easy one, and it's really interesting because I think if you take all the appliances that you have at home, some achieve things that you're getting really excited about. And I think before COVID, I would have probably been talking about, the blender, or I've been talking about, one of these things that gave you a quick instant smoothie, right? But today, you know what it is? It's the dishwasher.
No, I love my dishwasher.
I mean, during COVID, how many times have we not actually making food for ourselves that causes dishes, but not necessarily making us use the appliances? I mean, we go straight to the fridge, we bring things out, but we're piling up these dishes. And before, you got away with one load a day. Now, definitely, multiple loads. And our dishwasher and the one that I have is actually fabulous, without sounding like a salesperson.
Nice. Right. So moving on to talk about design and innovation, how have you seen that evolve across your career? Did innovation look a lot different 20 years ago than it does today?
Well, definitely. I think in essence, in the core, design is maybe not so different in terms of the approach you need to take and the way you need to think. I often refer to even how I was taught design in school. It's like it is still very relevant, but the problems we're dealing with are so much more complex, and that requires so much more collaboration. It's maybe when I graduated, most designers went out and kind of like one man's company, one person on a project. It allowed you to be that sole contributor. It was in those days as well. You had all these fancy, famous designers that everyone knew about, and they kind of like you went to that particular designer to get that particular style, and they were like brands, right? You see much less of that nowadays, because in fact it's so much more, it's kind of moved from being that product experience to this ecosystem of products, interactions, and services. And the complexity of that really requires different capabilities to work together, even beyond designers, I mean, with other functions, because there is no borders anymore. And I think it's fair to say that actually design is a cognitive capability, and it is a capability everyone is born with. But there are tools and methods and science to it that allows you by training to get to work as a designer on an athlete level. And everyone can run, but it doesn't mean that everyone runs at a professional level, right?
Yep.
Or everyone can sing, but it doesn't mean that everyone sings on a professional level. So I think it's so democratized and is so available to everyone nowadays. I mean, my daughter's just going to enter like a high school level, which is focusing on aesthetics and design, and the thinking is being taught on that level. So it's beautiful to see how that shift is happening.
No, it's great, and I can certainly vouch for the being able to sing, but not very well. I think. So
Me too.
In today's world, what are some of the core components for designing successful consumer goods? Obviously, like as you mentioned, that will have changed a lot from 20 years ago to today. Is there a lot of focus on user experience as well as functionality?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you actually think about it, what you need to do is first to understand what is it that you want to achieve. So, are you just reintroducing an existing product in a different format with, some added functionality? Or are you, bringing something completely new to the market? Or are you building a system of products that all needs to be great on their own, or, even more excellent together? All these different outcomes require a different approach. And in all cases, you have to then look at what is the larger context from a user or even other stakeholders. Who will be engaged with this solution almost from the starting point, because you may have to start thinking about, the user have their requirements, but maybe the service person has their requirements. So you have to look at it from multiple angles. And then you always have to look at what is the solution that is provided today, and what's working, what's not working, what hacks or other solutions are there that does the job as well, to kind of like understand the current context. But then at the same time, you also have to look at what are those shifts in society that may influence these things in the future. Is there new technology on the radar that may, come in and make an impact? Or is there societal changes or legislations that will have an impact? So you always have to look at insight as kind of like, what am I knowing of today, and foresight in what are the shifts that we will have to take in consideration. Because what we're doing when we're designing a experience is we actually designing for a future that has not yet existed, right? So within a certain kind of reach. And I think in most cases, we're imagining things in a 5 to 10 year horizon. We conceptualize things between 3 to 5 years, and we are implementing and driving experiences within, 1 to 2, sometimes 3 years. It depends a little bit on the complexity.
I hadn't thought about it like that, because as you say, when bringing out a new product to the market, you're asking the user to adopt a technology or a function that they won't have had before in their home. And obviously, before it gets to that stage, you need to think about what that function should be, and then it gets designed, and then it gets manufactured, and then it gets pushed to market. So as you say, you not only need to take in the market insight, but also the foresight. And no, I hadn't thought of that at all. And you mentioned there about how there's so many different avenues that you need to touch upon when designing products. I know that recently Electrolux published the Design DNA Element series, where you put a spotlight on each of the core components that Electrolux focus on when designing their products, with texture, sound, scent, material, etc. Did you want to talk a little bit about why this series was done, and the importance of highlighting each of those individual areas?
Can I start with asking you a question?
Yeah, go on.
So what were your impression when you saw that series?
My impression was I didn't know so much went into each appliance. Like, I suppose it's like, as a user, you imagine a fridge to be a fridge. Like, you don't necessarily think so much about the sound when it opens, or the motor noise, or the texture of the actual outside, or the handle, or the color. I mean, I've got a navy kitchen, which is probably not that common, but it was amazing, like on the color one especially, to see how they test so many different colors in different user groups, etc., and really try to make each element of the design DNA sort of special and part of the overall design. So it was really interesting, but it was also really thought-provoking, because you don't understand quite how much goes into designing a kettle, for example. You think it's very simple, but it's really, really not.
No, and I love that you said that, because honestly, I mean, that is the reason why we made that production, right? Because it is design is such a confusing world.
Mm.
I mean, I have this favorite sentence: designers designs, well, designs design. You know, it is fitting in all. I think it's few words that are actually that confusing. So I actually try to use it really sparse, because it doesn't make any sense, because otherwise it becomes Smurf language, right? But we have multiple brands within Electrolux, and I mentioned the core ones, which is kind of like 85+% of our sales.
Yep.
And each one of these brands have a formulated brand design DNA. So we didn't do the production only as a production. It's actually the foundational work is our brand design DNA, used in this case for Electrolux. So we have one for AG, we have one for Electrolux, and we have one for Frigidaire. And these brand design DNAs, they talk about, you know, the brand platform, the brand personality, and this brand personality should really inform all the touch points when you're designing for that brand, and the values that are within really derives from that heritage of that brand to be really authentic and really true to it. And then we have articulated those values through these elements, the 9 elements that we have exemplified in the series. And why we did it through these elements was to actually make sure that we're building this explorative culture, which is so incredibly important. Because I think if you go back to the history of design, especially if you take industrial design, there's been a lot of just starting with form giving, right? And you know, you have that stereotypical picture of a car designer standing there and sketching forms. But afterwards, then, you know, how is it going to manufacture? What are the material? It's actually much more effective in the process to start talking about what are the material properties that we want. Why do we want them? You know, we need to select these materials for sustainability, durability, or their beautiful properties. And how do we then optimize the methods that we use for these materials in the production? And what are the forms that will then make sense in how we are articulating ourselves? And then we know that multisensorial experiences are so much more impactful. I mean, I don't know if you've heard it, but simple things that research has proved that actually matter. Your coffee will taste different depending on what color of coffee that you're drinking from, right? So, and you know that if you eat in a fish restaurant and you have the sound of the ocean, you actually enjoy that sound much better than if you are sitting somewhere in a city and you're hearing the buzz of the city, right? So multisensorial impacts us, and we need to continuously explore these things to improve these experiences. And that's kind of like a nutshell.
No, it's a great explanation. And as you say, it's trying to make the user have that multisensorial experience, but in their own home, which is very, very difficult to do. But as you said, it's obviously the Design DNA series highlighted a number of components around design, but as you mentioned earlier, I know that something else of huge importance to Electrolux is sustainability. So how are Electrolux addressing sustainability initiatives, and how early and at what level is sustainability factored into the design of all of these products?
Yeah, so the sustainability, if you look at our products, I'm sure it's different for different categories of products, but if you look at our products, about 85% on an average is actually the CO2 of these products actually coming from the usage stage. So we have only over decades focusing on minimizing the energy consumptions, water consumptions, and minimizing resources, taking out harmful materials from our products and all that stuff, baseline things, right? And then I think we're realizing that is super important. But if you're not, as a user, understand why the washing cycle should take 3 hours or 4 hours for your dishes or for your clothing, for that matter, and you know, we have these wonderful, very, very, very excellent engineers that makes these programs more and more efficient, and the programs are getting longer and longer, but our users don't necessarily understand it, and they, you know, use the quick wash of 15 minutes or 30 minutes because that's the time they have. So, you know, how do we enable the users to understand how to make these more sustainable choices. And that has to be built in the interaction with the appliances or the applications that they are experiences, depending on the product at hand. And we have a beautiful example with, I've mentioned the favorite dishwasher. It's actually designed nudging you to pick the Echo program, which is 4 hours long, with a like nice green bar. So it's kind of like giving you this affirmation that that is the longest program. But what's more beautiful is that actually it's opening up 1.5 hours, the cycle is finished. It opens up for a natural drying cycle. So it's giving you this kind of like feeling that, yes, I can trust this manufacturer to do the right job for me. And the dishes are getting clean and they are getting dry. And if I have a little bit more patience, I'm actually doing the right thing. So the behavioral science of how we're using these products becomes extremely important. And then, of course, the material choices. You know, how can we make the materials we have circular? How can we make sure that we are bringing it back into the cycle? How can we make sure that we are designing for repairability? How do we make sure that the maintenance of the product is considered? Because I don't know, most people don't know this, but we have a collaboration with Stena Recycling, and that's a Swedish recycling plant. And I don't remember the numbers, but it was a high percentage of vacuum cleaners that was thrown away with the engine capacity still being above 50%. And it is mainly because, I'm making this hypothesis, but I have experienced this myself. It's mainly because we don't know how to clean the filters, how to maintain them. And then the performance of the machine goes down and we're not satisfied anymore. And it's actually not for any other good reason that we don't necessarily know how to maintain it. So how can we maintain it? How can we make sure that they are getting a second life? How can we make sure that they are repairable? And that requires a new way of thinking about it. So I think this shift happens, it's going to happen so fast that we will have to see more and more involvement up front, even before the project starts, because you can't solve a lot of these things in the project.
I think there's a couple of things. So the first point you made about the time on these machines is, I think, like me as a user especially, I would think, oh, the 30-minute cycle is doing better for the environment because I'm only using it for 30 minutes and not 4 hours, and it means that I'll use less water and all that sort of stuff. So as you say, there is that enablement side to users that needs to be done, so that they
and you're so
understand
right. And this is exactly the conundrum in that way, because I mean, I heard this recently, which I thought was a beautiful analogy. I mean, we don't understand why, when we put something into a machine and we took something out of a machine, that the time longer time would use less resources. We don't think about that. But if we think about a hand wash in a dish situation, or even a fabric care wash, then we know that if we leave it soaking for 2 hours, we know that we're going to use less effort of getting that clean, right? I mean, in dish care, that's very obvious. You take a big dirty pot and you put it in hot water for a while and you let it stand there, you're going to get it clean very easy. Yeah. So it's exactly the same analogy, but it's very counterproductive in many ways. So yeah.
No, exactly. And it's funny you mentioned the partnership with Stena Recycling, and that was going to be my next question, because I obviously I was doing a bit of research and I found that there was something called the 2 Infinity prototype vacuum cleaner that's made out of it's 90% recyclable compared to the normal 75% for a vacuum cleaner. And the question was going to be, you obviously, like refrigerators, for example, because of what has to go into them to make them operate, have been notoriously difficult to dispose of. So do you think we'll start to see examples of stuff like the vacuum cleaner, where appliances will be closer to the sort of more and more will become recyclable and it'll be easier to dispose of responsibly?
It has to be. I mean, there is just no other way. But I think this is so incredibly important that we are looking at it from a system point of view, and we're looking at it from, the system within a particular context. And that's where it's becoming even more challenging for global players like ourselves, right? Because, I mean, we have a certain system in Sweden, but, there is another system in Thailand, and, there's another system in Brazil. So how do you make sure that you are managing and driving these solutions in the right way globally, despite that maybe the system situation is different. So, I mean, these are not easy things. But if you look at Stena Recycling and our partnership there, we learned that some of the larger appliances, because they cannot be just thrown into one of those threshers, I guess they're building bigger threshers nowadays as well, but many of them are kind of like recycled by hand, and then you have to, of course, make that easy. But in the smaller appliances, they are kind of like just put through a big threader. And what you then need to do is you need to design the product so that the parts are falling apart in its purity. You cannot have parts of products which are then with multiple materials, because then it will go in and be burned, and then it's lost, it's a waste, right? So it's really about understanding the different appliances and how they need to be treated. But I think we also have, where's the shift towards local repair, 3D printing, I mean, there are so many circular economy opportunities. I don't think we have seen the beginning of this yet.
Yeah, and I think to that point, design is such a huge factor of that, in terms of how that will obviously progress over time, and there will be more recycling aspects of a lot of these products. And linked to that, you mentioned it earlier about how you're a big advocate of design thinking to sort of along that process of design within Electrolux. So for those that aren't aware, could you provide a bit of background as to what design thinking is, some sort of core components of design thinking exercises, and why that sort of the technique is so important in the design process?
Maybe, I mean, I would say the term design thinking is heavily debated, and I think the term is also heavily confusing, because some people make it as synonymous to the double diamond that was launched by the British Council in 2005. I'd like to look at it as I mean, the story that I kind of like see has the most relevance is when Stanford University was training engineers in these methodologies that designers use. And the students were asking, well, what is it that we are getting good at, And the answer was, yeah, it is the way designers think. And eventually that turned into design thinking. And of course, for designers, you can't separate design thinking and design doing, because it's kind of like all intertwined and it's all messy. And it should be. It's a highly creative process. But what is so amazing with design thinking in the way that it is kind of like sort of stepped out of the design discipline is that it offers a certain methodology to solve complex problems. And it is, let's say, the opposite of analytical thinking. In even you need analytical thinking in some cases as well, right? But especially powerful in situations where you can't just use analytical thinking to solve the problems. You really just need a different approach to it. And it is quite, in my opinion, it's quite simple in the way that you have to constantly asking, the whys, getting to the root cause of a problem, getting it, and then reframe what it is that you're trying to do. So you're looking at a problem from many different perspectives to ensure that you're not just thinking of, oh, I can solve it this way, and then you run in a linear manner. You look at it from many different perspectives, and then you evaluating these different perspectives and close in on something that is working. And it is in a way an iterative process where you it's an iterative process where you highly explore yourself out to the solution, and constantly looking at what you've got with eyes of wanting feedback for further improvement rather than critique of not succeeding, right? So I don't know if that helps in clarifying it. That's a kind of like, I think it's a mindset more than anything else, and a way of thinking. And then you have many different tools and methods that can be used depending on the problem at hand.
And absolutely. And what I love so much about design thinking is that sort of the art of the possible, like thinking outside the box. As you said earlier about how you're designing something or you're conceptualizing something 3 to 5 to 8 years before it actually goes out. And that's one thing that I love about design thinking, is being able to just think, right, what could the future look like for this scenario? What does the end user want from this appliance, for example? So there's so much, and it's a refreshing approach, I think, to, as you say, instead of doing it really analytically, being able to just think outside the box and what is the art of the possible and what could we achieve. And I think that's how businesses then become the most successful, is if they have these sorts of processes in place, because they're then the forerunners of innovation. And to that point, there's obviously so many amazing sort of innovation initiatives within Electrolux, but are there any examples of innovation across the group that maybe stick out as ones that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I always think that the most amazing innovation is the one that has not yet been put out there. You know, it's that never satisfying, never satisfying. With the status quo, that you can always do better. But yeah, of course, there's amazing innovation. I mentioned some already in our dishwasher, right?
Yeah.
And I think noteworthy. I remember, maybe just sometimes it's very small, but in our washers in Asia Pacific, when I was working there, we were constantly struggling with this pain point and irritation of not being able to open the door of a washing machine, because you always forget that sock. That you always want to open it, and you have to wait 2 minutes for the door to open. And then we discovered that with the size of the drums that we were getting at, and the water level being so low, in fact, you could always open that door without you didn't have to wait. Yeah. And that was a product that I lived with in Asia Pacific, and to me that was kind of like love, because I don't know how many times that I could just open that door. Yeah. But lately also, I think it's noteworthy to talk about our air purifiers. We know that, Electrolux is looking at sustainability. I mentioned the usage and the importance of driving a circular and a more repair-oriented way. But the other thing that we're realizing is that actually a big part of the challenges that the industry is facing. So if you were in the business of doing laundry, you're actually having to deal with the fashion industry, which is quite challenged, right? The fashion industry is one of the biggest threats to us. Fast fashion is an issue, right? Yeah. And then if you look at our kitchen appliances, we're looking at the food industry, and that food industry is also very challenging. So how can we, as an appliance company, influence beyond our products? How can we partner up, and how can we drive change on a broader spectrum? And because of that, we have also set up the Food Foundation, which is linked to food, which is non-profit organization, working with world chefs and really working on helping, supporting that larger scale of where the system is kind of broken. And the third area is air. Because pure air is, of course, extremely important. And over the last years, we've seen that the more digitally advanced the products are, the more humanly they need to connect. And if they should be deserving a space in our home, they should really be feeling like they're part of a home. So we've come up with a range of air purifiers over the last 2 years. The last one was launched just very recently. And I mean, they're fantastic products, but they're also extremely beautiful. And I'm so proud of the team that has delivered those to the market.
It's quite interesting. I hadn't thought about how, obviously, as an appliance provider, it's kind of, as you say, you bring together all of these industries into one sort of funnel there, as you say, with the clothes and the food. So that's something I've not thought of before in terms of how you can then sort of influence both ends of the scale there, so that it impacts stuff like sustainability initiatives.
One of the most important thing is actually to choose what we eat and making sure that our clothes are cared for longer. And if we can be a part of making sure that that happens, we will have a really positive impact. So that's important.
No, absolutely. And so just before we round up, Pernilla, I always like to get one last piece of advice. Obviously, I know you've given out some great advice so far during the episode, but one piece of advice, if you could give that to anyone that's listening, whether that be C-levels or employees or future chief design officers, what would that be?
Oh, one piece of advice. I have a favorite expression, and that is really around, if you have a problem, get a diverse group of people together and set out a process. Don't necessarily worry about the output. I mean, if you have a problem or you have a challenge and you set up a creative process to solve that problem, the solution will unfold itself. And so it is about trusting that process and give those enabling conditions to all these enormously talented people out there. And we will see such quick resolutions to change. I mean, I was just listening to, how we got vaccines for COVID out within 10 months, where no one could believe that to ever happen. And that was just because people came together. So it counts high and low, big or small.
No, absolutely. And just to finish off, if anyone wants to find out some more information about yourself or Electrolux or anything like that, where's the best place for them to do so?
Well, we have we have our website, but I would like you to consider searching for about design under Electrolux Group website. That's where we have actually launched, not just half a year ago, we launched a website talking about design at Electrolux. And of course, it links also to how we talk about sustainability. So the group website, I think that would be giving you a lot of information. And secondly, the Food Foundation. I love the setup we have there. So look that one up as well.
Absolutely. I'll leave all the links to everything you mentioned in the description, so it's easy for everyone to look at. So Panilla, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been great to get an insight into the role of the Chief Design Officer, as well as understanding all of the components which go into designing the appliances that we all use on a day-to-day basis, plus so much more. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.